Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us tonight, ESPN's senior writer Mark Ogden and the Telegraph's chief football correspondent Jason Burt. Very good evening to both. Let's quickly run you through those back pages. We start in the Sun. Trent Alexander-Arnold says his Liverpool teammate Virgil van Dijk would love it if England captain Harry Kane was dropped for Wednesday's Euro 2024 semi-final against the Netherlands. Into the Mail, the referee for England's match in Dortmund is under the spotlight. Their report on Felix Zweijer's ban for a part in a match-fixing scandal in 2005. That refereeing story also makes it onto the back page of the Times, and coverage of a sour end to Novak Djokovic's victory at Wimbledon. Into the Eye, and England's players defending manager Gareth Southgate. Both Alexander-Arnold and Luke Shaw claim he's a top man manager. And we will start with England and the maybe selection issues that are ahead of Gareth Southgate for that Euro 2024 semi-final against the Netherlands on Wednesday. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Jason, saying anyone facing England would like to see Harry Kane not playing. But for a manager who's often been accused of maybe being cautious or risk-averse, surely there's no chance he'll drop his captain.
No, none at all, actually. I was actually in that briefing with Trent Alexander-Arnold, and he was obviously defending Harry Kane, and understandably so. I actually thought the most interesting stuff in the briefing was Alexander-Arnold talking about how the fact that he took his penalty so well against Switzerland, that he wasn't affected by being dropped himself. Obviously, he started off in midfield for England and played 1.5 games there, and it was quite a tough thing for him that he then lost his place. And obviously, Southgate talked about it being an experiment in the first place. But he bounced back and he scored his penalty. But he was asked today about obviously having so many Liverpool teammates in the Dutch team, and I think it's actually Virgil van Dijk's play today. And he was asked whether he texted Virgil van Dijk, and was then also asked about Harry Kane. And that is a legitimate subject. I mean, Harry Kane's form has not been what he'd have hoped for, what we'd have hoped for during this tournament so far. But I don't think there's really any prospect at all that Gareth Southgate will leave his captain out for such a big game. And as Trent Alexander-Arnold says, if he did so, then it would be a boost to the Dutch. So I don't really see it happening at all. Although I do think Ivan Toney, is knocking on the door. Personally, I would put Toney in and play Kane as well. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think he'll stick with the formation that he played against Switzerland, with maybe a couple of other changes within that in terms of personnel, but not in terms of shape. Yeah, that is a possibility, Mark, to possibly go with two up front. But is it unrealistic to expect any better from Harry Kane, given that we've now got a 5-game sample of him not being particularly involved? In some quarters, some people saying he looks a little bit sluggish, maybe a fraction unfit, that suddenly is not going to change for a semi-final and we hope a final.
Yeah, I agree with Jason that he's not going to be dropped, but I certainly think it's an issue that's up for debate. We've seen in lots of recent tournaments with England that when you have the captain's armband, it's almost like you get immune to being dropped or criticism. David Beckham had it when he was probably past his best in 2006. Wayne Rooney had it a couple of tournaments where he seems to have gone past his best, and these players keep playing because of the captain. Now, Harry Kane ended the season as the top scorer in the Bundesliga. He's only 30 years old. He's definitely not, close to the end, but he doesn't look right. He doesn't look like he's fit enough. He can't move enough. His movement was really poor against the Swiss and in other games, and too often he's dropping too deep. So when Bukayo Saka put a cross in at the weekend, perfect for a centre forward in the 6-yard box, Harry Kane wasn't there. So definitely there's a situation whereby Gareth Southgate needs to tell Harry Kane, stay further up the pitch, don't try and go and search the ball because that's not your job. Try and be in the 6-yard box, the 18-yard box when the crosses come in. But his mobility is a concern. He's not moving well enough. And I think it's only when you see Cole Palmer come onto the pitch, Ivan Toney come onto the pitch, you see a bit more freshness, a bit more drive, a bit more energy. But Harry Kane's track record is why he'll start the game against the Dutch, but it doesn't mean he should do, but he will do, because it's basically he's being picked on. Form is temporary, class is permanent, as he said. I think Gareth Southgate is backing his captain to be what he used to be, but he needs to show it fairly quickly because we're at the semi-final stage now.
And on what Gareth Southgate may or may not need to say, Jason, back of the eye, we all love him. England players defend Southgate. There's an interesting piece that today, Monday, in the Times from Jonathan Northcliffe, where he talks about past tournaments that have come and gone, and England have found ways to go out of tournaments, perhaps blot their copybooks in other ways off the field. Do you sense the tone is changing at all towards Southgate and perceived errors he's making the further England go in this tournament?
Well, it should do, shouldn't it? I mean, I frankly think it's all been a bit ridiculous, if I'm quite honest with you. I think some of the criticism, especially that led by former players pushing podcasts and so on, I think it's gone far too far. And I think what's been interesting now is that suddenly some of those guys have changed tack and have become a little bit more cheerleady in the last few days. I think you need to be a bit more consistent in your assessment of how England have played. Now, they haven't played particularly well. We know that. But they've got themselves again into the semi-finals, and I think there's lots of other nations who will be very jealous of that. And the one thing you can say about this England team and Gareth, the one Southgate have actually made themselves very durable, very resilient, very hard to beat. That's twice they've come back in knockout ties in this tournament to win them. Okay, the opposition weren't the greatest, but the pressure is on, and we've all seen previous tournaments where England have wilted under that pressure. This time round, they responded to the pressure and they got the results. They turned it around. And I think one of the great takeaways from the weekend, yes, it wasn't a great performance. It wasn't even a very good game, but it was a magnificent penalty shootout. And we've never seen that before from England, that they've shown that sort of control. I think the piece I wrote at the weekend was they're only actually in control of the game when the penalty shootout came along. And again, that's the first time I've ever seen that from England. So I think we've got to cut the guy a bit of slack. I'm really surprised and disappointed that the nation and the people haven't got behind this England team a little bit more. We know they haven't played well, as I keep saying. But at the same time, they're going deep into a tournament yet again. They're 2 games away from winning it. England haven't won anything since 1966. They've never won anything abroad. I appreciate the criticism of Gareth Southgate, will continue and so on. But I am quite, I've got to say, a little bit fed up with the narrative that it's somehow this is happening despite Gareth Southgate rather than because of him. Because I've covered England a very, very, very long time. Let me tell you. And this era under Southgate, we may well look back upon in years to come and regret some of the things that have been said and some of the way that people have behaved towards him.
And I guess in this tournament, there is a style against substance debate, Mark, and also on the eye, Didier Deschamps, I don't care, as he shrugs off boring jibes, that it could be an England-France final with 2 teams being criticised for their style of play. Have you found it at all difficult to strike the tone between the results and the success over now 4 tournaments and the fact that it hasn't been enthralling at times and there are potentially some other players that we would have liked to have seen in the team at moments in this tournament?
Yeah, I just think that's international football, though. I think, apart from Spain, who've been really good to watch, nobody's really kind of impressed at this tournament. France have been dull, let's be honest. They've been really dull, despite the players they've got. Germany had good moments, not many great moments. The Dutch, after the Dutch a couple of times, and, they blew Romania away late in the game, but prior to that, they struggled. So I don't think any international team is anywhere near the level of the teams that are winning the Champions League, the Real Madrids, the Man Cities, people like that. It's a different game altogether. So I think England, yes, they've been hard to watch, and a lot of the players have been below par, but they're there. They're in the semi-finals, and I agree with Jason. I grew up watching England frustratingly get to the quarter-finals if you were lucky. Now they've been to 3 semi-finals in 8 years, and I was at the Iceland game in 2016 when it was the lowest of the low. So to be where England are now, you have to remember where they've come from. But still, I don't think it's too much to ask that some of these great players are basically given the chance to play. And I think sometimes you look at the formation that Southgate selects or his substitution choices, it's a little bit cautious. That's always been the case. The Croatia game in the World Cup in 2018, the Euro final 3 years ago. There are times when Gareth Southgate can just take too long to make a big decision and it costs England. So far he's got away with it. So far it's worked, but you do wonder when it gets to the really big games, the semi-finals and potentially the final, that is he going to revert back to that or is he going to be bold? So we'll wait and see. But ultimately it's about winning. And I think in international football, like Deschamps says, he's the master of it. You just got to win. You just got to get over the line and win. And nobody remembers how you played in the group stage.
Jason, I think the perceived wisdom is that whatever happens in this tournament, Gareth Southgate will probably walk off into the distance as the England manager. Where do you think he will land next?
That's a really good question, if I knew the answer to that. No, I think he's got a contract with the FA until the end of this year. I think that gives him some breathing space. Now, obviously, you're saying you think he will probably go, and I would tend to agree with you on that. I think he probably will go now, almost come what may. I think start of this tournament, if he'd have won it, I thought then that he might carry on and want to be the man who then takes England to the World Cup and tries to win that as well. But I think the criticism, the throwing of the beer cups, the general atmosphere. The one thing to remember about Gareth Southgate always said he would never outstay his welcome. He said that several times to us. And I think now he feels he is starting to outstay his welcome. So he's not going to hang around. He knows how much atmosphere and culture and the sort of general perception of England influences so much how England play. And England doesn't want to be part of the problem. He wants to be the solution. What I think, to answer your question, what I think he wants to do is to go into club management. I think the experience at Middlesbrough hurt him as well, because obviously he was a young manager going there. It didn't last very long. And I think actually, if you talk to Steve Gibson now, Steve Gibson, the chairman of Middlesbrough, probably regrets sacking Gareth Southgate. And he gets quite prickly when you talk about his club record, because it wasn't as bad as people say. Yes, they got relegated, but he had them near the top of the Championship. There's been huge cuts in budget, huge cuts in players being sold. So I think that's a bit of an itch he has to scratch to get back into club management. And I wouldn't be surprised if down the line there is that link with Manchester United, and I think that might come up again in the future if things don't work out with Erik ten Hag. I think he will always be around if he leaves England. Gareth Southgate is a possibility, because we know how much Ineos admire him. So I think he will look for a good club job. I think the other opportunity or the other possibility is to go abroad. I know for a fact that he thinks about that, and it's something that actually appeals to him. I think he saw with Bobby Robson, who went to PSV Eindhoven after England, that's not necessarily a bad route to take, to go abroad to sort of continue or rehabilitate your career there. I think he feels you get a bit more breathing space. So that's another opportunity. So I think he will look to get back into club management once he leaves England. I don't see him being an international manager or anywhere else. But, you know, his contract runs until the end of this year, so he has a bit of breathing space if he does leave after this tournament.
All right, we'll take a quick breather there, but we will come back to England in our second part as well, and in particular the little subplot of the man in the middle, the referee for that game between England and the Netherlands. Also on the way, in Jason's paper, The Telegraph, an exclusive interview with Ben Stokes on the imminent farewell for Jimmy Anderson. You're watching Back Pages tonight. ESPN senior writer Mark Ogden and The Telegraph's chief football correspondent Jason Burt are with us this evening. Let's continue to look ahead to England's game against the Netherlands on Wednesday. And the subplot, Jason, England referee is a match fixer, say the Mail. The referee for England's game served a 6-month ban for his role in a match fixing scandal. But I guess the big point about Felix Weyer, he refereed a game between Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich. And afterwards, Jude Bellingham said, you give a referee that is match fixed before the biggest game in Germany, what do you expect? Could be interesting.
Yeah, and that's obviously why the newspapers have picked up on this story and run with it very hard. We've led on it as well. I think the Times and the Mail have also led on it because of that angle with Jude Bellingham and what he said, which incurred a fine actually at the time for Bellingham. It adds an extra bit of spice, I suppose, to the occasion. Although I would point out the referee has been working successfully at this tournament, and this is fairly historic. And at the same time, you could argue he was also eventually the sort of whistleblower in this match-fixing scandal. So, but at the same time, I do understand the interest, and obviously Bellingham's comments adds a bit of fuel to the fire in what could be a very sort of tense, very sort of high-tempo occasion. And we also know the history of English football shows that, red and yellow cards have often played a big part in the outcome of key matches. So hopefully it doesn't affect this one, and hopefully that Bellingham will obviously keep his cool as the other England players, and the referee has a good match. But those comments, everyone picked up on them today because of the decision to choose that referee, and obviously everyone will be looking at it very, very closely the next couple of days.
Into the Sun then, Luke Shaw, as Jason mentioned, faced the media on Monday, obviously asked about England, but also asked about his club, Manchester United, as well. Tom Barkley, Luke Shaw has warned that Manchester United are on the charge again under Sir Jim Ratcliffe, saying, I think definitely United is in the right place now with the boss signing a new contract and the new owners coming to take their place. Things are looking really positive. Would you agree with that, Mark?
I've heard that so many times over the last 10, 11 years, so let's wait and see. We'll see what happens. United won the FA Cup last season, but let's not forget it was one of the worst Premier League seasons they ever had. Finished with a minus goal difference. The manager's still in charge. They haven't actually signed anybody yet, so it's early days. I think Ineos could go either way. They're making lots of big promises, but let's see what happens. I think the players have been linked with good players. They've got a lot of players to get out of the club as well. We know that Mason Greenwood might be leaving soon. He's in talks with Marseille. People like Jadon Sancho, Donny van de Beek. But I think Man United fans will want to be a bit more patient. They want to wait and see what the next few weeks look like because, I mean, it's now 11 years since Alex Ferguson left. I've lost count of the amount of managers they've had, the amount of resets they've had. So early days, let's wait and see. And let's see if Luke Shaw can get through this competition fit. Can he report back for pre-season training fit? And can he play the amount of games for Man United that they want him to play? He's been there for 10 years now, and he's basically played exactly half of the league games that he could have played. So he's missed half of the games as well. So again, lots of big promises at Man United over the years. Not many have been delivered upon. So maybe more action, less talk, and that's the best way to go forward.
And does it feel a little bit, Jason, that Luke Shaw is talking about the manager, and obviously it is good for him that there is clarity over his future, but a lot of the success, if it's delivered this summer, will be dependent on the likes of Jason Wilcox and Dan Ashworth in those senior football department positions?
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously to a degree, what else could Luke Shaw say when he's asked today about Manchester United and about the manager? And I think the big issue at Manchester United at the moment is clearly sorting themselves out in terms of the structure and the personnel themselves to run the club, because so many mistakes over so many years and wasted so much money. They cannot keep afford to do that much longer. And I think what's going to be interesting this summer is just how much really they can do financially. I think they have got a very limited amount of money that they can spend without moving players on. Obviously, Luke Shaw will not be one of those players. They'll be desperate to keep him. He's a key player for them. But I think there's an awful lot of organisation, an awful lot of restructuring to do at the club, and that probably has also partly helped save Erik ten Hag in the first place, because the priorities really lie elsewhere, and clearly they couldn't find a better replacement at the present elsewhere time. But as you touch on there, the Omar Barada coming in as CEO, Jason Wilcox, Dan Ashworth coming in. There's an awful lot of change at the top in terms of the organisation of the club, and that's really where the direction will be at present. And I think Manchester United fans unfortunately have to be a little bit more patient, but I hope for their sakes that things start to work out for them, because the club has been drifting for too long, made too many mistakes, and really needs to sort itself out.
In terms of recruitment then, Mark, it's being widely reported that Manchester United are going to go back in for a second bid for Jarrad Branthwaite of Everton, which is expected to be rejected by Everton. If you were in Jason Wilcox's shoes or Dan Ashworth's shoes, is that the sort of player that you would be pursuing?
Yeah, he's a sort of player you'd be pursuing, but what United have got to be careful of is spending the kind of money they spent in the past. I think United have gone there with the valuation, I think around £45 million. Everton want, I think, £70 to £80 million. And in the past, United have played a hard game in July and early August, and then got to the middle of August and panicked and spent £85 million on people like Anthony and Harry Maguire. So yes, he's a good player, Jarrad Branthwaite, and he would make them better, but there's a limit to how much he's worth. And I think United have got to make sure they don't do what they've done in the past and spend over the odds. So will they do that? We'll wait and see. As I've mentioned before, the players that they're trying to get rid of this summer, again, players that they spent a lot of money on that haven't delivered. So they have to be sensible. And if Everton aren't prepared to let Branthwaite go what they perceive as his valuation, they have to move on and target somebody else. Jason and I know that over the last few summers, United have spent way too long trying to sign players that they've either not had a chance of getting, or they've spent way too much money to get them in the end. So they have to get away from that kind of panic buying situation they're in. And so Branthwaite may be a case of Everton not accept, move on to find somebody else.
Let's move on to a story and a man who features across a lot of the back pages on Monday evening. James Anderson, he prepares to say his Test match farewells after 188 tests. He will play against the West Indies for the final time on Wednesday. Jason, your paper, Ben Stokes exclusive, moving on from Anderson, right call for the Ashes, which you would think that the man himself maybe disagrees with. As he says in Simon Burton's piece in The Guardian, I'm bowling as well as I ever have and could still do a job. It's quite interesting, this sort of tussle, isn't it, between potentially there being a little bit of thought process looking further down the line of moving on from Anderson, finding those who can fill very, very big shoes. And as I said, the man himself, who clearly doesn't want to go.
Well, that's partly why he's such a competitor that he is. He's 42 now, so time catches up on all of us. The interview in The Telegraph with my colleague Nicole's a really good one. He starts off talking about how Ben Stokes texted Jimmy Anderson last week and said, "You didn't have to do that, did you, when he took 7 wickets?" And obviously that's putting the pressure back on Ben Stokes. But I think Ben Stokes explains really well why this decision has been taken. Obviously, it is to look to the future. It's a new era now for England, a rebuild. rebuild towards the Ashes. And it's not just Jimmy Anderson who's paying the price for that. They obviously have to move on from other players as well and really sort of start and look for the future. But at the same time, he is going to get a great send off. And as I say, we watched the sort of press conferences today, and you can see he's really irked by it all, and that competitive spirit is still burning within him, even at 42, and that's what's made him the great cricketer he is. So I think it probably is the right decision. It had to happen at some stage. I think England have to move on. They have to rebuild. They have to look to the future. And Ben Stokes is trying to get things sorted for the Ashes, which is clearly the priority for him.
Yeah, it's one of those difficult ones, isn't it, Mark? Because every once in a while you can get that sort of perfect storm in sport, and someone like his old mate Stuart Broad is able to wander off into the sunset with taking the final wicket with his final ball and hitting a six with his final delivery. But ultimately, someone like Ben Stokes or Brendan McCullum have to be cutthroat in the world of international sport. If they believe it's the right thing, then they can't just allow him to go on and on forever as much as he wants to.
Yeah, and the thing with Anderson is that we know he's a football fan. If he's been watching the Euros, he has to just look at Cristiano Ronaldo and realise that you can go on too long. You know, Jimmy Anderson, one of the greats of the game, one of the great English, British sportsmen of our generation. But there does come a time when you have to call it a day, and Ronaldo's proved that in the Euros. And I think if you go too far, it can tarnish your legacy. And the last thing that Jimmy Anderson would want to do would be that guy that people say in a year or two's time that, you know something, he should have gone a couple of years ago. So go now, got in a high, and people will always say, what a great player, went at the right time. It is about time, and I think this is the right time to go.
And I asked this question in our newsroom earlier and got a very grumbling, angry response from our producer who said it's impossible to gauge this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to annoy him. 20 seconds on both of you as the greatest British sports person of all time, as both Anderson and Andy Murray come to the end of their careers. Jason first.
Archie Gemmill.
Archie Gemmill. Interesting. Why?
He scored the greatest goal ever for Scotland in the 1978 World Cup final.
I wasn't expecting that. Mark Ogden.
Yeah, that's giving Jason's age away, so I'm going to go from a little bit younger than that. I don't know, I think Seb Coe, dominated the Olympics during the 80s. I think you can't get, gold medals at, Moscow and LA, so Seb Coe.
OK, all right. There were two answers I wasn't expecting from the pair of you, but that's what we love about this show. Jason Burt, Mark Ogden, thank you very much indeed for being with us tonight.